I'm also coming to you from the traditional lands of the Kaurna people on the Adelaide Plains, and also the home of Farmers Union Iced Coffee and the best Shiraz in Australia. I'd also like to thank Gordon and his team for making this event happen, and I hope we can do it in person someday. Now, my day job is in information technology, and my side hustle is being a lay member of a HREC in Adelaide. I've also sat as an alternate on some additional committees. I don't officially provide technology advice to the HREC, but those topics do arise lately, and that leads me to sharing some ideas with you today. Let me also start by saying I'm not here to represent the view of any HREC or institution, and I'm not here to provide cybersecurity advice. So, what's cybersecurity got to do with research ethics? Research ethics relies on consent, integrity, and privacy. Now, if the data in a research project is breached, you've lost privacy because the data has been accessed by some unauthorized party. You might have lost integrity because you can no longer trust the data that was collected, and can the research even now reach a conclusion? And then you've lost consent because the whole point about enrolling participants was you were promising privacy, confidentiality, and integrity in the first place. And additionally, breached data can cause a problem to the participants for social engineering and identity theft. And that's actually a risk of participation. The national statement hints at cybersecurity in the sense that it suggests a type of harm minimisation in data handling. That's why it encourages concepts such as de-identified data, separating personal identifiers from content, and limiting the fields that are collected. You want to have a smaller attack surface as possible, essentially. That's sort of an IT way of looking at it. So HRECs have an interest in the security of researchers and their institutions, but do they have an active role to play? And I think they do. And that role can be to push for better practices in the research ecosystem and to set some standards, set some expectations. So I'm going to quickly talk about 4 things, which will be personal accounts and devices, data destruction, data management plans, and boosting HREC capacity. So number 1, personal accounts and devices. Public service employees are typically not allowed to use their personal email addresses to conduct their government business. And that should also apply to cloud services like online storage and personal devices like laptops and desktops and phones and so on. For example, there's a problem that some cloud storage services try to help you by hoovering up all your data, whether you ask for it or not. So you might suddenly find that all your research data is suddenly parked in a personal OneDrive account, which you didn't ask for and didn't want. And of course, occasionally the use of personal email accounts pops up in the media and becomes a scandal for whatever reason. And there are some famous examples of that. And the problems with using personal accounts are basically security, because the employer or the institution can't apply their standards to those accounts, and accountability, as personal accounts may contain information that's needed for some sort of investigation. And if that can be destroyed by the owner before the investigation can take place, then you no longer have an investigation. And the other problem is that data can leak from a device that is stolen or compromised or not wiped when it was handed off to the grandchildren. Now, that's not to say that institution-provided services are not at risk from all those things, but in any case, it's a sort of a moot argument because you're not supposed to use those personal things anyway. So my first suggestion is that HRECs should remind researchers that all their correspondence and all their data needs to be stored within their employer-mandated service. And that sometimes, you'll see a protocol where someone's got their Gmail account on it. You should point out that that's not allowed. But actually, I was thinking perhaps that something like that could actually be a boilerplate for every approval letter, even if they haven't really demonstrated to you that they're using a personal account, just to remind them not to do that sort of thing. Number 2, data destruction. Data has a life cycle. It goes through creation and collection, processing, presentation, archiving, and then destruction. And in an IT sense, destruction is an equally important part of the cybersecurity process. But I noticed that researchers focus on their obligation to retain data for their research integrity. And with the Optus and Medibank breaches recently, you might have seen that in the media, we have heard loud and clear that the public expects personal information to be destroyed when there is no longer a need for it. Now, that's easier said than done, obviously, so it's not an easy thing. But many descriptions of data storage do not give a clear timeline for destruction. So you'll see expressions like retain data for 7 years. So that sets a minimum storage, but not a maximum storage. And I also think that open-ended statements like that will create problems for HRECs in the future, because they're going to have to parse imprecise descriptions of data retention. So for example, if a researcher wants to use a data set 10 years later, but it was ostensibly supposed to be deleted after 7 years, the HREC's going to have to twist themselves in knots trying to work out what to do about it. So my suggestion on this topic then is to have more robust and precise language as a standard thing. So my example here is the sort of thing you could say is we're obligated to maintain the data for 7 years, and then it will be deleted as securely as possible within 3 months. So that sets the minimum, sets a maximum, and it does tell the participants what will happen to the information in a fairly specific way. Number 3, data management plans. The NHMRC has a document called Management of Data and Information in Research, which says that researchers should, as opposed to must, develop a data management plan as early as possible. And in that document, they have quite a laundry list of what should go into a data management plan, and that includes data security provisions. Now, my observation is that some of this information appears in protocols to a degree, but I don't think that that covers what the NHMRC is actually asking for. I think they are asking for more. Now, of course, at the moment, we know the cybersecurity landscape is getting worse, and there is a lot more data spread out over a lot more systems. And stakeholders, I think including HRECs, will want to see more information on how projects are being secured. Now, at the moment, the NHMRC language in that is a bit soft, but I think ultimately a more robust data management plan will be required for every project, and the should will turn into must. And that will accelerate if there is a big breach somewhere. If we have some big study that blows up, everyone is going to get a lot tougher. So that now then leads me to my 3rd suggestion, which is that HRECs should request from their researchers a standalone, robust data management plan for every project, as an appendix, I guess, probably as an appendix. So it's easier for the HREC or the governance process to review. Now, based on what Susan was saying, I think I might have just given researchers another reason not to be happy with HRECs, but I don't think that will be very burdensome, really, because the NHMRC now is actually telling researchers that they should do it anyway. So all we really want to see it is laid out neatly and on a single page so that we can review that more readily. Number 4, HREC capability. Now, HRECs have mandated roles to build a diverse skill set to assess applications. Research, obviously, is increasingly using cloud services and storing much more data, and the security risk around that is much greater than ever before. So I think HRECs should actually have some in-house technology skills, not necessarily a gold-plated fair income cybersecurity expert, but someone who can parse a data management plan and comment on it or approve it or push back on it in some way. So that could be a full-time technology member to the HREC who sits in the meeting. It could just be someone who is an outside consultant, or a bit like a drug and therapeutic devices committee that reviews things and then advises back to the committee. And some of those people could be like the institution's in-house IT people who could pop in on maybe do a couple of hours a month to advise, that sort of thing. So they're my 4 ideas. So my conclusion: how can HRECs contribute to cybersecurity? Reminding researchers to only use their institutional email and devices, and to only use services mandated by their institution. Enforce better descriptions of the data disposal process. Ask for a standalone data management plan to make it easier for HRECs to assess those things, and add some capability to HRECs with technical knowledge. And that's what I wanted to say today. So I'd be delighted to discuss further or answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Geoff. My first question is, would you like to come and work on my HREC? But passing lightly over that, we do we do everything online, so it doesn't matter where you live. What is the rationale around having, this is from an anonymous attendee, what is the rationale around having a data management plan? Can you please explain it further?
Well, the data management plan that's what the NHMRC is telling researchers they should do. And the idea is that it's descriptive of the way the data is handled, and they include the physical and software and elements of securing it. So they want to hear about everything that you are doing to keep the data in the project safe.
Excellent. Do you want to unshare your screen, by the way, because then we'll get bigger pictures of the people who are visible. Okay. Fantastic. And you've had a complimentary comment saying, excellent talk.
Well, if I may,
yes.
if I may just engage in the discussion. And so, Geoff, look, an incredibly timely talk, and you know, I think I've said, and I don't know how many times I've said, but data management exceptionally important. And as ethics committees, if we manage consent and we manage data, then you know we've done a large part of our job. It's and thank you for pointing out what the NHMRC suggests should happen. I will say though that this isn't about the NHMRC. I mean, this is about what institutions should be mandating. And so I just maybe seeking your thoughts then on, and you did mention the technical expert on the HREC, but is there a standard you think HRECs should accept? I mean, or a standard that should be mandated by the HREC, or should it be left to the NHMRC or to the institution? There's obviously some authority there from the NHMRC, but does the HREC have to mandate some other authority by which they require, as an absolute, a data management plan?
Well, I'm quoting the NHMRC because it's sort of a top-down authority to HRECs to demand that sort of thing. In terms of
okay, well, the NHMRC are talking shoulds, but my point is that, you know, should HRECs be talking musts?
Well, that'd be pretty bolshy, I think, if the HREC started to tell researchers that they had to do it. But actually, I think the first HREC that tried that would probably get a bit of pushback, maybe. But then in a couple of years, they'll all be doing it. So whoever goes first will have to knock a few doors in, but I think this stuff's inevitable. It's inevitable that sort of thing will be a must.
Yeah, what they used to call, yes, minister, a courageous decision minister. For the first one, first came off the rank. It's always hard to be.
For UQ students, Paula, I think they better get used to it, because you know, Geoff, I agree, and you heard it here first from Geoff, but ethics committees will be doing this, and it's something that I believe should be as a matter of course. And I liked your point about destruction of data for this particular reason, that it's very easy to say we'll keep the data for 10 years, but those who are of a certain age may not be around in 10 years. And the question is, what then happens to the data? To whom is it the delegated responsibility? Do you feel then, Geoff, that every institution has to have a data governance framework to take account of the possibility of researchers leaving at any particular time?
Well, I mean, there's a terrible practical problem with all that, which is that, yeah, I mean, what do you do about in 7 years' time? who knows where the data is, who's got it, and who to dispose of it. And in the old days, you could have a box of papers that had a date stamped on it, and you just shred it when the date comes up. At my institution, we have projects that store data for 30 years because of the children involved. And so to me, that just boggles the mind that they think they can gather up data in 30 years' time and find it and dispose of it. Never mind all of the funny little copies and fragments that have gone through different systems in the next 30 years. You'll never find it. You'll never get rid of it. It'll be floating around for ages. So to me, it seems incredibly heroic to think that you can get rid of something in 30 years' time. But probably in terms of having a formal framework, I mean, it may well be that what you have to do is say, yes, once the project is finished, all the data moves into some sort of central repository that the institution manages. You do not keep it on your laptop. It all gets pruned out of your email. It all moves into the repository. And then you have a archival process. You need a couple of full-time staff who sit there all day managing it and deleting it. So the digital archivist, I guess. And
I think, Geoff, we are in this paradigm right now. I mean, that's where we have to be, because otherwise, for the reasons you have suggested, data floats around the ether, laptops, etc., and you can't control it. So I think we do have to be a lot more rigorous now in how we deal with it.
I have another question of my own that is a particular interest of mine, which is data collected via digital devices and going to third parties, because so many of these devices, you take something like a Fitbit. When Fitbits first came out, they were owned by a little company, which was very good about making sure that they didn't collect data. But then Google bought Fitbit. And now anything that's entered into a Fitbit goes who knows where and gets sold to who knows whom. And you never know what's going to happen. So even if you as a researcher are using a data device that you know is not going to be shared, you never know when that company is going to be taken over by another bigger company who may have entirely different attitudes towards data privacy. So we're trying to encourage all our researchers who are using data devices to collect data that they make sure their participants actually consent to that, knowing that a third party might have access to it. Have you got anything else to add to that? Because it's really quite a vexed issue.
Well, I guess that's the sort of thing that would go into a more detailed and robust data management plan, that if you're collecting through a Fitbit, you would have to say that, well, this data is going into Google, and once it's there, we can't get rid of it. And that's what would go into the data management plan. And then the HREC would have to say, is that information reflected in the participant materials so that they can consent correctly? So that's why we need the data management plan to be more fulsome.
The national statement actually covers this. It's covered under section 3.1.66, but there's a whole lot of issues that I think people don't think of as being part of a data management plan. And things like third-party data collection is definitely one of them. And there are others as well.
And Paul, can I just make one last point, and that is that I've recently come across an instance where there has been a data breach. We know there have been data breaches recently, and this entity had to go back to determine whether or not their information sheet disclosed appropriately. The data would be either administered off-site or shared with third-party provider. And, the relevant ethics committee had not insisted upon that despite the information being provided. So to me, that it creates another problem potentially where there hasn't been sufficient information provided to the potential participant to understand what may happen. It may have changed, of course, whether or not they had decided to participate. It may not. But when you find there's been a data breach and you haven't included that information, it does create another problem.
We've got two quick questions. One, Jackie is asking, what about the FAIR, the FAIR data framework, thinking about sharing data for future reuse? So I'll throw that one to you first, if I may.
Well, I'm not across that specifically. I know that there is a lot of talk about everyone contributing their data sets into a big repository so that everyone can play with it. If that's what that's in reference to, I'd have to say I'm a bit queasy about it, because the way things are going, you could have a little data set of a particular topic, and then someone else has got a little data set with another topic, and someone else has got another data set with a little topic, and it's all de-identified in the classic way, but then you bungle those little data sets together and you can probably locate who those people are.
Yeah.
So I'm not super keen about taking small data sets from diverse studies and just throwing them all together and then letting the big data people at them. And I don't think that's what people expected when they signed up to a small study that was studying fractures.
That is a real problem, although there's nothing to stop researchers setting up, or universities or hospitals setting up their own secure repositories. We've got a question from Professor Leland Bandler. How do we manage? It's a really good question. How do we manage when researchers move from one university to another, as they often do now, if we store research data within university servers with appropriately very limited external access?
Well, that sounds like an operational thing, which I'm not really across.
But it can be difficult.
That's the governance, data custodian type work, I think.
I think, Paul, I'll just nip in there, because again, there have to be certain conditions associated with how you accept the data in the first place. And I think this data management plan really has to include what happens when your PI moves from one institution to another. To not do so, again, does not take account of the potential things that can happen. And I think Geoff's point about rigorous data management plan, and thank you, Leland, for that, really should include this eventuality, because it's not an uncommon eventuality, one that is foreseeable. And leave it there.
Well, I mean, if you think of just an honours student, if they're going to store their data for a minimum of 5 years, they're only going to be at the university maybe for a year. The data have to be looked after for at least another 4 years and possibly longer. Yeah, look, I think we've gone through most of the question. There was somebody who actually, I think, addressed a question to me about what would happen. Can Google do anything they like with your data? And the answer is yes. Google is almost like a country. It's no bigger than most countries. Google can do anything they want. And never mind where you set your security priorities, they take absolutely no notice of those. So yeah, if Google have got it, forget it. Okay, well look, we've actually run a little bit over time, and I know you've got another session that's running in parallel that's still going for a while, but most people are probably going to go off and grab a bite to eat. Geoff, thank you so much for a really, really interesting talk. And in fact, to all three of our presenters, groups of presenters, or four of our presenters, because they were really, really interesting topics and really interesting papers. Thank you so much.